In Nigeria, as in many nations, fake news, conspiracies, and attacks on democracy are rife. So free speech is critical, and few people do more to protect that around the world than Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the brilliant Nigerian storyteller and thought leader. I spoke to her about the prospect of change in her home country and about having the courage to speak up against censorship on all sides of the political spectrum. Ngozi Adichie, welcome to the program. Can I start by asking you about very important elections that are going to be taking place in your country towards the end of this month? Nigeria has such potential, human resources, mineral resources, and yet there's always a worry about electoral integrity, corruption, fake news, all of that. What would you say is at stake in these elections?
Saying that I'm filled with a kind of cautious optimism about this particular election. And I think something's very different, and it's because of one particular candidate, Peter Obi, who has kind of given rise to this organic, exciting movement of young people who now feel that there is hope, you know. So apparently lots and lots of young people have registered to vote because of him. The large crowds everywhere he goes. And I think what's different now is that people have seen an example of the idea that leadership can be sort of a service, you know, the idea of leadership as service. I think we, for so long in Nigeria, felt that we had leaders who kind of thought they were doing us a favor. And suddenly here's this man who's talking to everybody and going everywhere and listening to everyone and saying, hold me accountable. And so I think people have, I think it has changed the political landscape in Nigeria. And I say this, and I think whether or not he wins, something has changed in the way that we think of elections in Nigeria. Young people are so determined that this time, you know, that elections have to be fair because people are invested in a way that, you know, I personally find very exciting, but also I think is significant, not just for Nigeria, but also for the rest of Africa, because, you know, despite all of our problems, we are, you know, we're a big player on the continent.
Mm-hmm. The hugest player in terms of the economy. But let me ask you, why do you think that he has made such a difference, Peter Obi, and he is mentioned as the front runner and the most sort of, you know, exciting, because we have seen that, you know, the 2019 election numbers showed a record low turnout, and yet, as you mentioned, and as the figures point out, a huge number of young Nigerians especially have registered to vote. What do you think has changed in the circumstances, or is it just the personality?
I think it's largely the personality, but I think there is also context. Things are so difficult in Nigeria today. There's, you know, life is difficult and it cuts across class, I think, for both high and low. There's just so much to be unhappy about. There's so much discontent. And then into that comes this figure who is unusual, you know, who seems to really be connected to ordinary people. And who cuts across, which I think is really important, cuts across ethnicity. I mean, this has never happened really since Nigeria became independent in 1960. We've just never had a political candidate who's had this kind of vision.
Chimamanda, can I just ask you whether some of these issues are troubling to you? Obviously, I know that you've publicly endorsed Peter Obi. I know that the former president Obasanjo has as well. And as you say, there's a record turnout and a massive amount of excitement about him. But it seems that there are some questions, and I want to know whether you think he can answer them probably. Plagued with allegations of failing to publicly declare assets and offshore accounts, also accused of investing state funds into a company he had dealings with. Can he get over that? Has he answered those questions satisfactorily?
So two things. I want to start by saying that it's that we, for Nigeria, in which our political landscape is one in which there's just a kind of you know, there's no sense of accountability. These, when you put them in context, no, they don't bother me very much. I think the first part is he was governor of my state some years ago, and I think from the way that he was governor, I mean, the way that he was sort of transparent. So I think the idea is that we're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for perfect human beings. We're looking for people who we think have the character, have the possibility of doing things differently. I haven't quite been convinced of that allegation that he was sort of doing something about hiding money, something about the Panama Papers or something.
I just want to jump in because it's really interesting that you say in the totality these don't bother me, and we have to put it in context. So let me put something in context. And by the way, I'm not comparing Peter Obi to these figures, but there has been historically massive corruption in your country, particularly over, such huge money makers as the oil industry. In 2013, I spoke to your then finance minister, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, and we talked about the corruption that she was in government then, around the oil funds. So let me play you what she told me back then.
Let me mention two things quickly. The first one is the oil theft, that is 150,000 barrels a day of oil, which is huge. Yes, I admit that, and we can't afford. Actually, my thesis on corruption is we are still a poor country. We cannot afford any leakage. That's why we have to fight. We need every naira and kobo to run that country. So that leakage has to be fought.
So she was very clear on that. Of course, 10 years on, corruption is still huge. So the question is, can somebody like Peter Obi or anybody who tries to lead your country out of that scale of corruption, can they be successful?
Of course, yes, absolutely. And I just want to say that Peter Obi really is not in any way connected to the oil theft.
I know that. I said that. I'm just putting it in context because of the huge problems that your country faces. And I might as well add some of these. Look, you've got inflation at 21.5%. I know a lot of our countries have the same in the global north. Your unemployment rate, though, stands at 42.5% for young adults. 40% of the population lives under the poverty line. That's daunting for any president.
It is, but I also think that it's the reason that there is this sense of cautious optimism about him. And I should also say that he's actually the only candidate who has shown some level of transparency in talking about how he made his money, in talking about what he owns, and even in talking very sort of bluntly about the oil theft. And that's unusual. So I think I do believe that with good leadership, yes, absolutely, things can change.
The epidemic of self-censorship, now this is broader than what we're talking about in politics, but in general, is something you have been speaking. You use that term, the epidemic of self-censorship. Tell me what you mean by that. Give me the context of what worries you there.
I think, in conversations about this expression, freedom of speech, which even that has become quite politicized in the world today, where people talk about, it seems a very crude divide between say whatever you want and, think about the effects of your words. But I think that in that debate, something has been lost, which is that it's not just about the ways in which a government or sort of recognized social institutions can silence us. What's even more important is the way that if we live in a society that is so that believes in a kind of puritanism, we start to censor ourselves. I think what's happening now is that people are so worried about saying the wrong thing that nobody wants to say anything. People are worried about asking the wrong questions, and so they don't ask questions. And the reason it worries me in particular is because, I think literature is in danger. And obviously I'm a writer, and as a reader, literature has been the love of my life. And I just think that if we continue as we're going, then the literature that we will produce for the next generation will be false. Because we have writers and artists who are now producing in a state of self-censorship. And I think social media has played a major role in this. I think people are now thinking about who's going to attack them online. I think also that, I think right now in the world, we don't really, there's a sense in which good faith and the assumption of good faith is dead. So people will generally have the most uncharitable interpretation of what anybody says. And so what that does is sometimes without our knowing it, we start to silence ourselves. I think it's human nature to want to, sort of preserve ourselves. Self-preservation is very human, and so it's not surprising then that people who are sort of artistic creators start to hold back, start to censor themselves, and I think it's bad for human culture, for our societies. It means that we cannot grow and learn, because if you can't have debate, how do you learn? How do you grow?
Has it tempered what you're willing to say or write?
I like to say that it hasn't, because I make myself very much aware of it, and so I'm determined to stay true to my artistic vision and to follow, the story wherever the story goes. But the ways in which it has affected me is that I don't read reviews. I won't follow anything written about my work. So I do the work and then I sort of step back. But I know that not many people are able to do that. Examples, there's so many examples. I think we know of so many people who have faced just immense backlash for saying something that, for some of us just seems absurd and absurdly sort of unequal to the backlash that they get. I talk to a lot of young people, and I think that there's a sense in which young people want to be good people. I mean, I suppose all of us want to be good people, but I think young people in particular want to be good people. And usually what that does is it can silence you, because if society is telling you, you ask a question and you're told you're prejudiced or you're evil or something, because you want to be a good person, you're going to silence yourself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you say things you don't really believe, and sometimes you don't say what you believe. And all of that, I think, is because there's a kind of societal orthodoxy. And it's both on the left and the right, by the way. I think that on the political left, there is a kind of, sort of condescension that often can be sanctimonious. And on the right, there's a kind of mean-spiritedness. So in the US, for example, what's happening now is there is a frenzy of book banning.
Yeah, I mean, your own book was banned, right? Half a Yellow Sun was banned from a high school in Michigan last year.
Yeah, so I'm told. Yes.
Why?
So many other wonderful books have been banned. I don't know. See, this is the thing. There's something very arbitrary about the bannings, mm-hmm. right? So, and it's often very political. So now we're looking at literature, not through artistic lenses, but through ideological lenses. And I think that's so dangerous. So there are people on the right who want to censure history, for example, who say, oh, you can't teach about, for example, the terrible Jim Crow laws in this country because it's going to make the white students feel bad, which to me is just absurd. People should know what happened. And on the left, there are people who say, oh, you have to be very careful how you talk about minorities because, you're going to, I don't know, hurt their feelings or something. And my sense is, and there's a lovely quote from a poem I love by Robert Lowell, and yet why not say what happened? I think we should be able to say what happened.
That's a very important statement you just made, and I was really interested that you also said in your speech, and you've referred to this briefly, but the death of curiosity, the death of learning, and the death of creativity is what's at stake here, and that no human endeavor requires freedom as much as creativity does.
No, yes, absolutely. I'm a writer, and I know that the process itself requires a kind of what I'm going to call a radical freedom. That you have to be in a place where you're thinking and dreaming and learning, and that's where art comes from. But if you start off thinking that you cannot go wherever your vision takes you, then it's a problem. And I should say that in talking about this, right, in sort of crusading about how important it is for creativity, I don't want to diminish the importance of, sort of sensitivity and I don't want to suggest that we cannot wound people with words. So I personally, and I think most of us, have been hurt by words. But I think because of that, that's why we need to protect speech. It has such power. And maybe what we should be talking about is, let's create a space where we assume that there's good faith. So if somebody says something, let's not jump to the most uncharitable interpretation, right? And I know that some people don't have good faith. I know that there's trolling, but I don't think that we can say that because some people are not of good faith, then that the principle itself of good faith is dead. And I think we just need more people to speak up. We need more people to show moral courage. We need more people to push back against this kind of encroaching self-censorship that I think is happening all over the world.
Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Christian.
And in